thing that she did that was really smart was she took the refereeing issue, which is something that we can all see. We can all see that the game is extremely physical. The coaches talk about it. You see, you know, there's no real freedom of movement for perimeter players, regardless of who they are. I think, like, I was listening to Ryan Ruocco, and he kind of described Caitlin Clark as a magnifying glass for these issues, and I couldn't agree more, where, like, Caitlin was kind of the way in for a lot of people, but then you realize that this is happening with a lot of guards, and it impacts the way that the game is played. And then we see the league's response to it. We see the NBA referee account get involved. We see the way that Kathy Engelbert talks about refereeing as it's not a problem. And we start to understand, okay, their approach to this is to be to kind of deny, to obfuscate with data, to, you know, just go on a PR offensive rather than to actually just say, hey, we understand that this is an issue. And it didn't really have to be this way. There's a world in which I think Engelbert's position could have been like, hey, look, we are so excited about all this influx of attention and investment. We're really excited about the direction the league is heading in. I think that we have done important things to prepare for this moment. At the same time, like any underfunded startup, we have holes, and we look forward to, you know, communicating and collaborating with the stakeholders in our league to figure out how to make this the best league it can possibly be. I think anybody would have respected a response like that, but that's not really what we got at all. And I think what Fee did was she took that attitude and she showed us how that applies not only to refereeing, it applies to the CBA negotiations, it applies to how Kathy talks to players about salaries, how she talks to them about the media rights deal, and she says things that are just downright disrespectful and borderline misogynistic in the way that they sort of pull from, like, very old world boardroom techniques to make women feel like they shouldn't be negotiating for their salaries, to telling them that they should be grateful that they even have a job, or that they should be grateful that they even have this media rights deal, which, by the way, is a mess. We talked about this in the last podcast. Like, all of these things that the players are smart enough to know that they don't need to be grateful for, so they're able to call that play out. And I'm so glad that they did, because I think it's a great example for a lot of people negotiating for themselves in the workplace, that this is just a tactic to make you doubt yourself and doubt your own worth. And the players called it out, and I love that, and I'm so proud of them for it. And at the same time, it's incredibly frustrating to see this from the female commissioner of a women's sports league, that is, you know, I'm getting riled up now, but, like, you know, is touting women's empowerment as, you know, one of its marketing ploys, and, like, being role models to young girls. Meanwhile, in private, not only there's a way to negotiate, you know, there's a way to say we can't give you what you want, right? Like, we've all been in negotiations. I've been in plenty of respectful negotiations in my life, but the things that she says to the players it sounds like they are just downright demeaning. There's like a Fee kind of talked about the reffing as like an insult to her intelligence. They've taught, Kathy has said to Neko Ogumike, a Stanford graduate, that she doesn't understand the business side of things. You know, like, it's things like that I think that I just don't know how. I don't know how you walk back from this. Like, I don't know how. I don't know what she says on Friday. Like, I don't think like that's. But yeah, I don't know. I've been talking for a while. You go ahead.
No, I mean, I think it really is just that you have, like, two layers of issues here. One is the actual sum and substance of what is going on in terms of refereeing, in terms of league operations, in terms of negotiations, et cetera, which is, you know, the actual bulk of the job description here in terms of, like, meeting those points as it relates to satisfying ownership and the brass above her in the NBA. But then you have this layer of optics and messaging and relationships. And I think, like, look, that first pile of the actual operations and the logistical side and financial, incredibly hard. And I think there are lots of potential, like, good faith disagreements about the right way to pilot the league through this moment where you have so much growth and you want to make sure it's sustainable. But that second layer of how you're communicating it, both to the press, both to other stakeholders in and around the league, to the players themselves, like, that one, I think, just has been so unequivocally a failure across the board for all of the reasons that you're saying. Like, all labor negotiations are going to get heated in one way or another. They're all going to play out to some degree in the press. Like, we see that with other leagues all the time. That's normal. This kind
Mhm.
of very personalized dynamic where the players feel so personally not just demeaned, but like really deeply, I think, disrespected and offended.
Mhm.
Like, that is a different level of problem that is beyond like a disagreement at the table. That, I think, is where this has like boiled over in such a way that it's becoming at this point like it feels like it's impossible to repair. And I think it's so telling that in that Sports Business Journal report, even though it was supposedly before Napheesa Collier's statement, that it was framed in terms of relationship building, in terms of how she's communicating with players and people around the league. Like, that's, like you said, there are like specific issues here that can be hard to fix, but you can talk about them and you can present them to the media, to others. You can delegate some of the presentation on this to others in a way that is just going to completely change the tenor and tone of the conversation. Like, something I actually have been thinking about a lot here is that I covered MLB before I covered the W. And in MLB's contract negotiations, historically, they have a deputy commissioner take the lead of being at the table as the lead negotiator against the players. So, like, obviously, players still are not going to have super fond feelings towards the commissioner. That is normal in sports. There are disagreements.
Yep.
But the person they are sitting across the table from who is having to be the bad guy is a deputy commissioner. And they do that deliberately so that the commissioner can then have a different relationship with the players. That's not, I am the one sitting across the table from you telling you, here's why you cannot have X, Y, Z. Like, this is wrong. It's a matter of how you delegate. It's a matter of how you then package that in the press, who is then sharing those conversations with reporters. It basically like a way to kind of deflect some of the spotlight, to shift who is doing what. Like, it just makes a lot of sense. And obviously there's not a one-to-one comparison here. I don't think anyone is looking at MLB as like a paragon of great labor relations. I'm not trying to say that, but just the fact that there is an effort to structure this in a way where the commissioner is not the locus of everything and is putting in some thought into how this is presented both to players and to the press and to other stakeholders. Like, that just feels totally absent here. And I think it's telling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reality is that Kathy is the number two, right? She is a deputy in a way.
Yeah,
like,
which I think is another
yeah, go ahead.
Interesting thing here is, like, obviously you talk about commissioner is a difficult job in any league, but I think obviously in most other leagues you're used to the commissioner answers to ownership. Here, the commissioner answers to ownership and then also answers to Adam Silver and to NBA ownership with varying interests in the W. And like, it's a hard, messy situation. I don't envy it, but I think this pretty unequivocally is getting to a point that feels like one of no return.
Yeah, I agree with you. She is speaking on Friday. Customarily, the commissioner of the league speaks before the finals, and that is still happening according to Callie Finn, friend of the show. So I think that will be interesting. I do not know what she could say or do that could make this better. I don't really have a lot of faith in her behind a podium, to be honest. I've seen it before, and it's usually when she gets herself in trouble. So I guess I just wonder what happens next from here. Does the NBA and the WNBA just try to grit their teeth through this thing and try to have Kathy continue to be the commissioner throughout the course of these negotiations? Because also trying to make a huge change at the 11th hour where the CBA is about to expire in 30 days is also very difficult on their end and would probably put them in a bit of a bind as well. And then you also have the question of who actually is that person who's going to step in and do all of this. So I don't know what happens. But I have been thinking a lot about sort of where the WNBA is at and where it was at. Like, I think that there is a version of the WNBA where Kathy Engelbert could have kept getting away with sort of, coming off as a benevolent liaison to the WNBA and still continuing to, have the ownership's interests at heart. But we just live in a completely different league now. We have, like their sunlight is the best disinfectant, but also beyond that, the players have so much more power. Like to me, this is what really the Napheesa Collier thing is about. It's the fact that as she said, you have a league that is trying to operate with power and control as opposed to innovation or collaboration or anything like that. But the players are in a completely different situation right now. These are no longer, like Sid Colson was talking about this on her podcast. This is no longer the league where there's like the existence is an existential threat and you don't want to ruffle any feathers because you're worried about whether the league is going to exist anymore. There are two leagues you can play in now if you're a star player. And I just feel like whoever the next commissioner is, hell, if it's Kathy and she stays, this is what you have to adapt to. Like, this is the new reality, because ownership structure, not ownership structures, but ownership priorities are going to change as well. Like, by 2030, 18 of the votes on the Board of Governors will belong to ownership groups that have a WNBA stake, whether they also own an NBA team or not. Once the expansion rosters kick in, then we'll see what happens with the Connecticut Sun sale. And then you're going to have 18 on the other side. And then you're going to have Mickey Arison, who is in a really weird position where he doesn't own a WNBA team, but he invested in the capital raise in 2021. So he owns stake in the WNBA in general. So now an ownership group, like the ownership group of the of the NBA that was once not concerned with the league, that kind of considered it an annoying aperture, is going to look very different in terms of how they prioritize the WNBA as well. Which I mean, that can really only be a good thing. Like the way that we got here with expansion being pigeonholed, into NBA teams, I don't necessarily love, but I think that's probably a positive for the league's growth.
Yeah, that's something I've thought about a lot, and I'm interested in potentially reporting this out further, because I agree that I don't love the way it has been handled, in a way where it feels almost punitive against what could be some very interesting and very invested and well-capitalized ownership groups for expansion franchises, and shutting out anyone who doesn't have a connection with an NBA team. I have questions about the way it's been handled, but
yeah,
I do think that you see the way that these teams can share resources, can share facilities, etc. Like, there are ways to do this in an arrangement that I genuinely do think benefits everyone and makes for like a better, more vibrant team culture, and like more broadly like basketball culture in those cities. Like, I think that is cool and a good thing. And so on that level, I think, I'm interested to see where this keeps going. But yeah, the ownership structure here, it's like, has been very opaque for a long time. There are so many hands in the pie. I think it's obviously like a sign of how much it's changed, that there are more hands that want to be in the pie, that see this as growing in a way that is going to be beneficial to their self-interests, because it's going to be beneficial to everyone. But like, it's I think a really tricky, like, logistical, operational point for the league. And also then you have the other side of how is it being communicated and packaged, and how do you make sure that you're doing that in a way that makes sense too. And so yeah,
absolutely. So you were actually on the ground as well. Like, you have been in Las Vegas covering Aces Fever. What has that been like? Has that created a ripple effect, as like after what Fee said? Is it like, what's the buzz?
Yeah, so that one, it was interesting that was yesterday at shoot around. Fee was speaking as the Aces were doing shoot around, and the Fever were in the training room about to start shoot around. And so the Aces, it wasn't quite like you can see it spreading around the room, but it was like players were becoming aware of it gradually as they came off the floor. Like, some people have phones, some people don't.
Right.
Some people, like,
it's not like in the movie where one person sends a text and the whole school.
Right. It wasn't like, like the shot clock went off and everyone looked up and like grabbed their phones. Not quite like that, but like it was kind of like a ripple effect where, the first player who came over for media availability was Chelsea Gray, because she is a player rep, and we like read some of those quotes to her, and then other players heard. And, that was kind of broadly, obviously, the morning of a game 5, there are other things to focus on, but across the board, there is support generally. And then you had the Fever come into shoot around, and they had already heard everything, that they had been looking at the tweets. They had apparently, some of them had been watching it individually being streamed on their phones. And it really just is so striking to me that like there was no surprise, no doubt that like this is the thing to discuss this morning, that everyone is thinking about this, everyone is watching this, even on the morning of the game 5. And like it didn't even seem like it was a no-brainer that like the players were talking about it, and of course we were going to ask them about it. And coaches obviously commented too. Team staffers were commenting about it. Like it just really felt like a kind of across the board, across the league, it's like this is something that is resonating in a way that is really unusual, which I think you'd seen earlier in this series too. Like obviously after the end of game 3 in Phoenix, everyone was talking about Cheryl and talking about Fee like that. It wasn't the first time it's happened in this series, but it definitely was notable. Like this was what everyone was talking about, basically. Which, like, this was also what everyone was talking about in any basketball context, I'm sure, over the last 48 hours.
Yeah, I mean, are the refs and Kathy, are they the new stud buds? Are they the force that is uniting these opposing teams and galvanizing them together?
Maybe this should be Kathy's next step, is dye her hair pink and see what happens.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. What if she shows up on Friday with a pink wig? Like that, I think, is step 1 to her image rehabilitation tour.
Which would be great, because that in this case would actually be seen as like a reference to the Asia Wilson pink wig, and then become another commissioner is actually backing a team in the finals with her sartorial choices controversy, and then we'll be right back where we started. So
oh gosh, that is so true. That is so true.